Hey, good evening to the Issaquah City Council Committee work session on Monday, September 8th, and call this meeting to order. We have two items on the agenda. The first is transportation concurrency, and the second is going to be the Eastside Fire and Rescue 2015 budget. And before I get started, we got started a little bit late, and I apologize for the inconvenience to everybody, and including those at home watching on television. The traffic issues outside, and if you haven't been through on any of the valley roads today, it's been backed up quite a bit. And one of our key stakeholders who's presenting to us here in the, regarding transportation concurrency just finally got here, and we do have a quorum. We are missing one of our our council members, but we have 6 of us here, so we can go ahead and get started. Thanks everyone for your patience. So the first item on the agenda is transportation concurrency and impact mitigation fees. And this is a continuation of a subject that we all are slowly becoming experts on. We're going to have 7 subject matter experts in addition to those already on staff by the time we're done. And but I don't need to say a lot. Are you going to start off, Charlie or Dave? Yeah. Okay, you're going to facilitate, and I know that we have Randy already standing at the mic. So
I'll facilitate very briefly and say hi. We're here to, as you already said, to continue. This is the 3rd work session meeting of 4 planned work sessions on concurrency and impact and mitigation fees. We have focused in the first 2 mostly on the road, the traffic element, and tonight we're planning to shift towards the non-motorized or multimodal element of this work program that we're working through this year. In your packet is a briefing paper as well as 3 attachments, and there are paper copies here if you need, but...
Okay, your mic isn't on, I'm sorry. Maybe just speak into it. Yeah, it's up. Up is on.
So there's a briefing paper as well as 3 attachments in your electronic packet. Copies are here tonight, and we turn to our esteemed helpful person, Randy Young, who has led us through many of the discussion, and I think that's what I've got to say, and turn it over to Randy.
Thank you. So as we begin this evening's meeting, we're going to do just a quick review of where we've been. The first 2 sessions that we had focused on 5 different versions of a traffic model that tell us how we're doing now and how we might be doing in the future in terms of congestion. And this very fine print graphic in front of you, you all had copies of this back at the previous meetings. Dave and I referred to it as the table of many colors. And basically green meant good and yellow not so good, and red meant an intersection that was completely failing your level of service. And we went through 5 different versions of this, which corresponds to the 5 columns that are varying amounts of green and red and yellow. Let's talk a little bit about more detail about what that looked like. When we met on June the 9th, our transportation consultant, Torsten, was here and presented the first 3 of those 5 versions of the model. The first one was the 2014 LOS, level of service, which simply tells us what are things like out there on the roads right now. And I guess this is the time for me to say, don't get me started. It was a bit of a chore to get to you this evening, but I'm glad that I made it, and I apologize to you and to your viewers for delaying the meeting a little bit. When we look at the current situation, there were only 4 intersections that are at E or F, that is, that are below your accepted level of service standard with today's population. But then Torsten took the traffic model and did the second version, the year 2030 no action. 2030 means he loaded into that model all the growth that we expect that's going to happen in between now and the year 2030. And intentionally didn't put in any new transportation improvements just to see how bad it would get. And it got really bad. There were 27 intersections instead of 4 that did not meet your standards. And so he then ran one more version, which is the 2030 action model number 1. He was eventually going to do a total of 3 action versions. And that first one, he took your adopted TIP, Transportation Improvement Program, a list of projects that you had approved as part of your long-range future, and he plugged those in and said, well, let's see if that cures the problem. And the answer is it helped a lot. It took us from 27 problem intersections down to 17, but it wasn't enough. So he then went back and did 2 more versions of the model and came back to you at the July 14th meeting. And version number 2, the 2030 action number 2, we came to think of as sort of fixing everything. It actually didn't quite fix everything. We still had 4 problem intersections, but it got really close. But it got there at the price of the price. It was very expensive. We were engaged in very expensive solutions to problems and still couldn't make them all go away. And so he brought to us and shared with you the final version, the 3rd version of the model, which backed off a little bit from the fix everything and instead looked for the most realistic and affordable solutions to fix as much as possible, and came up with a pretty decent balance in which it's still costing a lot of money. You know, a couple $100 million is a lot of money, but it's no longer $300 or $350 million, and was able to still solve all but 6 of the intersections. And so we talked about where does that leave us, and we made a recommendation to you that this map, which again, a little hard to see, but you as council members have this in your package and had seen it before. This map showed those 6 intersections, the 3 red and the 3 yellow. And what we asked was, would you be willing to have us go forward with this research for concurrency and for impact fees and see if we can build a project list and an affordable mitigation program around that set of projects. We didn't ask you to approve a new level of service standard, but we said we would come back to you with a recommended revision to the level of service standard, that it would no longer be D across the board, that every intersection would succeed at that level, that we would write a specific set of criteria that would allow a limited number of intersections to be below D, some to E, and reluctantly a few perhaps to F. Your consensus at that time was, yeah, go look at that, bring it back to us. So I want to really stress more for the viewing public than for you, you didn't vote on that. You didn't change the level of service. You gave us permission to try and craft a program built around the possibility that a few of your intersections, a half a dozen, may not be at the level of service you'd hope to accomplish. But you were giving us the permission to try that in order to not make this as nearly as expensive as it was beginning to look like it was going to be. You won't be deciding tonight on that question. You won't decide when we see you again in October and in November. What will happen is when we bring you the official package with recommendations and you've seen all the pieces at these many work sessions and you've had many chances to ask us about it, and all of you sit on committees that we come and visit with, after lots more conversation, then you'll have all the information in front of you and then you'll get to decide. Does what it looked like on July 14th still appeal to you, a limited number of intersections at a lower level of service, or maybe not so much? Maybe you're willing to spend the extra to solve them all, or maybe it's so expensive you want to allow even more than a half a dozen intersections to be not so good. And that's what we're going to work out between now and your final decision in December. So based on that consensus of, sure, give it a try. Take a look at a realistic list of projects and some exemptions to level of service D. We then went through a series of meetings. And again, this is less as a reminder to you as council and more to the public who's here and to the viewers, that 3 of the committees on which all of you sit on at least one committee, and some of you sit on 2 of these committees. We met on July 17th with the Infrastructure Committee, August 7th with Services and Safety, and on August 12th with Land and Shore. Although at the August 12th session, we did, because of agenda issues, decide to put it off to the next meeting. I'm not listing what's on here was the first round of meetings that we met with you between the June meeting and the July meeting. So this was already your second round. And you're going to see 2 more rounds of committee meetings, one after tonight and then another one after the October meeting. So lots of opportunities for the public to attend, to listen, lots of opportunities for council members to ask questions, to think more about it, to come back with fresh questions and ideas. At these meetings in July and August, you discussed the policy question some more. How does it feel to have possible exemptions to level of service D? And can we hold the line at only 6 intersections, or would it get worse than that? And we started talking about the project list that was on that last map that would make it possible. And we're not here tonight to go through the details of the individual questions that each of you asked, but staff and I kept good notes. We know about specific questions, concerns, locations of projects, projects that weren't on the list, and we're mindful of those as we continue on this project. At the moment, we're still working with the list that we gave you at the July 14th meeting. So that brings us up to today, and what we're going to do today is to talk about the multimodal project list, because so far we've been focused on the level of service as it would be provided for the streets, the road system, and vehicles. And part of the solution to that is a significant commitment by Issaquah to getting people out of vehicles and walking or bicycling or using the transit system or other forms of staying out of cars. And you've made a commitment in your Central Issaquah plan to see a significant increase in that. And what we're going to talk today about is what kind of projects might it take in order to achieve a 10% additional increase over where you are now in the Central Issaquah area, and an additional 3% increase in multimodal travel in the rest of the city. And then the other topic we'll talk about briefly at the end. You've seen the list of road projects, but we're going to bring to you this evening, or if you've looked in your packet, you've seen that we now have price tags on all of those projects. So we have a better feel for what that project list looks like, and we're going to end our discussion today with just a quick look at that. But I want to focus us mostly on the multimodal project list. The list that's in front of you this evening is kind of like the road project list that Torsten gave us for version number 2. Remember the fix everything? Put it all on the table and see what happens. And so we have the build everything version. And we have 29 non-motorized projects totaling $74 million in costs. And we got them from all over the place. We went to every approved, adopted document that you as a council have considered, whether it's the comprehensive plan, the Central Issaquah plan, mobility action plan, even the design standards for Central Issaquah, the walk and roll plan. We went to your transportation improvement program, which has some non-motorized projects in it. And we pulled everything together and had a staff team look over it and decide, yes, this is the appropriate list. This isn't quite every single project that has ever been listed in all of those. There was some care given to those projects that are, for instance, not already covered by a street project that's going to include some sidewalks, and some other projects that didn't seem to have a growth component to it. But we've not yet put these projects under the microscope to see the extent to which they're going to get us to that 10% and the 3%. This is kind of the whole earth catalog of potential non-motorized improvements. Our next step before we see you at the October study session is going to be to narrow that list. And when we come to see you over the next 2 or 3 weeks in your committee sessions, we want you to have a chance to ask us more specific questions about the list, even as we are refining it. But we are using some draft criteria for narrowing the list based on a successful project that I did for the city of Seattle in the South Lake Union area, where we identified things like reducing congestion, adding to the capacity of the system. And so we're learning how to try and apply those standards and some others to this list of 29 projects to make sure that there really is a growth connection and that this isn't just solving existing problems. So that's the background behind this list that you have. And what's in your computer, and all I'm putting up here on the screen for focus purposes, is simply for format. There's a 4-page list of these 29 projects. And from left to right, the first column is the ID column. That's an identifier that was associated with different planning documents. It was the number that was given to a project at that time. It's not significant to our discussion today. Now, more understandable is the project name. The first one we have, Project G9, is Newport Way Bike Lane Ramp. Then there's a brief project location. In this case, it would be from Newport Way at 28th Place. It would be kind of a spot improvement. And then there's a more detailed project description, and then at the far right are the estimated costs. Many of these cost estimates have appeared in previous documents. Many did not, just as we didn't have cost estimates for some of the additional transportation road projects that Torsten came up with in that last list where we went from the numbered projects to the lettered lists, A through G. Those were the extra ones he came up with. We had to go out and get cost estimates for those. Same is true here. And so we had to engage the experts who do cost estimating for non-motorized, and we have a cost for every single project. And I'd be happy to take questions as we go. If I see a hand up, do you want me to?
Thank you.
Go ahead, Josh.
Just two brief questions. One is on the cost estimates that you've provided. Are they in today's dollars or based on when the project would expect to be completed?
They're all in today's dollars, as we have done with the road projects, and the reason is this is going to be refreshed regularly and probably indexed annually, and so we've tried not to guess what future inflation is, just get it right for today.
Okay. And then my second question is, and maybe you'll get to this in a bit and tell me if you will, you talked about narrowing down the list. If we didn't narrow down the list and every single project was assumed for purposes of the fees, what number does that spit out? In other words, how much of this list do we need to pare down to get to that target number I've heard pitched of whatever it is, 19,000, 29,000? I forget what the number was. There was some target number that somebody threw out at our last infrastructure meeting that I had never realized that we ever discussed, but apparently somebody has it in their mind that there's a target out there. So
Let me deal with that number first and then talk to your question about the relationship to this project list, okay? I'll take responsibility. You can throw me under that bus as the author of that number, and the number was $19,000 a trip. And if you get into the time machine with me and we go way back to September, almost exactly a year from ago, the 9th of September 2013. So come back tomorrow and then we'll go back a year, okay? In this room, I gave you a presentation at that time laying out the framework for a simplified concurrency program and a very significantly updated mitigation program. And I shared with you then that in order for simplified concurrency to work, that is for people to not have to do all kinds of complicated traffic studies and case-by-case negotiations, we were going to offer them a faster way to get to yes for traffic capacity if they would pay the cost, the true cost of all of those projects. At that time, I took what was then an old estimate of project cost list and a first guesstimate of what the non-motorized cost would look like, added them together, did some rough math, and said, it won't be this number at the end, but it could be $19,000 a trip. So it wasn't something that a council member came up with or a staff member came up with recently. It's actually been hanging around for a year. We don't refer to it a lot because we expect it to change. And it could go up or it could go down. So to get to your question, it isn't a target as much as it's an estimate. So let me tell you what we know now about that estimate. We don't have a new number, but we do know that the non-motorized list at $75 million is about $30 million higher than the estimate I was using back then. So we'd expect that 19,000 to go up a bit. On the other hand, I'm going to go ahead and steal my own thunder when we get to near the end of my slides and we talk about the cost for the road projects. Those have gone down by over $50 million. So with all the toing and froing and backing and forthing, we may be within a stone's throw of that $19,000 estimate. Now, there's a lot more work that is yet to be done before we come back and say it's real, it's defensible, and it's actually 13,900 or 21,300. Kind of a long-winded, but that's the history of that, and that's where we are in terms of the non-motorized.
Thank you for that dialogue, and I just want to reiterate and make it perfectly clear. There has been no council discussion, there has been no policy decision, and no direction given that aim for that number.
Correct.
It has grown a little bit of its own mythology, and I think it's good that we put it to rest, and thank you for that clarification, Randy.
Yeah, I can't say often enough that all we've engaged in for a year with you, and we're going to for another 3 months, are work sessions at which we're putting out pieces of the possible solution, but no council member has endorsed any of this. You've, on the case of the level of service, given us the consensus of go ahead and try this level of service that might have 6 intersections that have less than you want, but you didn't agree you're going to approve that in the end. You've given us a chance to try and come up with a more affordable road package, and as I said, we reduced that project list by $50 million as a result of that direction that you, not so much direction you gave us, but the permission to look at that. So now what we want to do this evening is not go through each project one at a time. That's for any of you who have glanced at the list and want to raise questions. We'll take notes. When we get into the committee sessions and you've had a chance to glance at the list a little more carefully and we're in smaller groups, will be a better chance for you to talk to us about specific projects. We've intentionally not brought the staff team tonight who are the experts on these projects. So if you ask me about the description of Project G or OT2, I'll read it along with you, and that's about as much as I know about it, okay? I'm the one compiling the list and working out the cost estimates in total for you, but there are other experts who will be the ones that will turn your questions to. But this is a good time tonight to raise a question about any project you've seen, and we will write it down and we will get the answers for you.
Does anybody have any questions about any of these projects? Nina?
Well, OT2,
Just happened to pick
just
that one.
happened to be that one. I just wondered because of the discrepancy. Oh, thank you. Yeah, I did want to ask about OT2 as an example. I don't know all these projects, but that one jumped out at me as something unfamiliar and different from the TIP Sunset project when you consider it as a road. And so I just wonder, well, how do we marry discrepancies, or is there a discrepancy between those two tracks that the staff or whoever's planning the multimodal and whoever's planning the roads? Do you know what I mean?
The general answer is we absolutely, when this is finished and the lists are refined and finalized, there will be no duplication. It'll either be all on a road project or all on non-motorized, or they'll each take their share and treat it accordingly. We're partway through that process of ground truthing the project list. And Dave, you pointed out one to me when we came in, I think it may be the last one on the list or something, that it talks about a road project, and what we're trying to do here is do the pedestrian and non-motorized portion of it. We think that the costs are accurate for the non-motorized portion, so we think that the 74 million is close. But just as with everything we've brought you, it's in workable form, it's suitable for sharing with you, but it's still in a refinement process. You know, we want to have the ability to make improvements to the project list and to the costs and bring them back to you at the committee meetings and at the final meeting in October and November.
Okay, any other questions about the list? I did want to put one out there. I think I know the answer. There's one up there. It says Confluence Park. Of course, we have a master site plan, and that includes a bridge over both the East Fork and the main stem. And I'm assuming this is a different facility, a different, I could be wrong, but if it is different, I'd like some comment on whether or not, that would require a change to the master site plan, because I believe it would.
I believe it's the same.
Same bridge?
Same bridge
Okay,
as
all right.
the approved plan.
Okay.
And we look at, well, should it be funded out of what pot? So that's the marrying part that we're talking about.
Okay, thank you. Josh?
It's not about the list per se, but I'm still struggling, maybe Randy, you can help me, with thinking about what things on this list to eventually look at for trimming, because without knowing what that policy will be, whether 19,000 is the right number, 10,000, 25,000, without knowing what that number is, there's not a target to then look at this list and go, okay, we're willing to sacrifice level of service by removing one of these projects, especially on the motorized side, which is going to have an impact on our map and the little colored dots.
Yes.
For the sake of reducing the overall cost of the impact fee. So until I know what that final number should be, if you tell me the number is 19,000, just to use that example, and all these projects on the list, because now you've lowered it by 30 but increased it by 50 or vice versa, get us to 19,000, then that looks like a good list, because we know 19,000 is where we want to be. So it's a little hard as a policy maker to develop the policy and to do that exercise when we get to that point. Just, I'm not saying for tonight, but when we get there, until I know what we all think that number should appropriately be.
So if I may, I want to follow up. How do you think we'll actually decide that?
The number?
Yes.
I was trying to find it, and I thought that we had received some information about other jurisdictions as a benchmark in terms of their impact fees, and it must have been at one of those earlier meetings.
I think it
And-
was September 9th, 2013.
May have been.
Yes.
And I was trying to find it because I think once, at least in my mind, and again, maybe I'm looking at this differently, but once I know what an appropriate number should be, or even a range that we want to target, then it's a lot easier to take that list and say, I'm willing to sacrifice some level of service in this part of the city in order to get a lower impact fee, or I'm satisfied with the impact fee target that we have, leave everything on the list for now. I think we have to analyze what that number is. It just keeps being a mystery, you know, we don't have a number yet. We don't know what that number is, but I feel like I can't go any further with this until I know where that number or that range should be.
Okay.
If I might, in my experience with working with councils all over the state and all over the country with the challenge of how much to charge for impact fees, I find that each council member comes to the question with a very personal set of concerns and a different understanding of how this all plays out. And for some, it clearly is the number and what does it look like in the neighbors. For others, it's literally flipping the telescope around and saying, tell me the level of service question. What am I getting? And if I need that level of service, then I need to be an advocate for that number, even though that number may seem high compared to the neighbors. So I'm used to hearing concerns about, or at least questions about the number, but I'm also expecting equal questions about what's the level of service I'm getting for this? What am I having to sacrifice in order to bring that number down? Or what is it going to cost me to keep that number up? I will remind council, I don't think this comes as a surprise to anybody, even though it's been a year since we rolled out the $19,000 number, that's right up there at the top in the state of Washington, but it's kind of mid-level stuff if we were in California. Now, we're not in California, and those aren't our competitors for development, but here in Washington, it turns out our very near neighbor, Sammamish, is the holder of the current Guinness Book of Records in the state of Washington with an impact fee at about $14,000 per trip. And that has not been updated since 2008, and they're talking about updating that now. So that you even at 19,000, you may not be completely outside the range of holding the record. Having said that, the number 2 number in the state, and I don't know who has it right now, is half of that. It's $7,000 or $8,000 or $9,000 a trip. Okay, and then one more observation about the size of these numbers. It's tempting to be concerned that if the number gets to some threshold, we will take our economic development strategies and we'll undermine them, because who would pay $19,000 a trip to build an Issaquah? And if the cost of $19,000 a trip was equal to 50% or 75% or 100% of the cost of the development, of course you'd be right. Nobody's going to say, I've got $1 million building, oh, and I'm going to pay you $1 million in impact fees? That's not going to happen. What we know from experience and academic research all over the country, in Washington and not other places, in other places and not in Washington, is impact fees at this level don't stop development. They don't even slow it down. Now, why is that? I mean, if I'm a consumer and I'm driving a vehicle and it's getting low on gas and I got to fill up the tank and I'm driving by 2 gas stations, I'm paying attention to which one's got a lower price. And I'll go to a different station for a nickel a gallon, a dime a gallon, a penny a gallon. I'll do that. But it's because we're talking about fundamentally identical products. It's still liquid petroleum going into the tank of the gas that makes my car run. It's highly regulated, and I can get pretty much the same product anywhere. I can't get the same real estate product anywhere. Issaquah is a different place to live than other places, and it has highly desirable features that will keep people coming here, whether they want to build a place to work or build a place to live, that overcome a lot of that small economic edge. So $19,000 a trip is small, but in the context of building a building, impact fees in Washington typically are 2, 3, 5%, almost never more than 10% of the total cost of the project. So it can be a noticeable hit, but it doesn't stop the development. It means the developer either has to change their marketplace and sell to a higher market, or they have to remove some of the amenities from the product they're going to sell, or what they really do, they raise the price of their product. You thought you could buy that house for $600,000, it's now $650,000, because you're going to get the same house on the same lot in the same school district in the same desirable place to live, but their cost of business is a $50,000 impact fee to you. Actually, at $19,000 a trip, it would be $19,000, and they're going to pass that cost along. So when they do that, does that mean nobody can afford to live in Issaquah? if that was true, how come we have 80 cities in the state of Washington with impact fees, some of them pretty significant, and yet development is still going to these places, places that most of us haven't heard of, like Kirkland, Redmond, Bellevue, Renton. These are places like you that are still experiencing substantial growth, and impact fees haven't run them off. So probably running a little long-winded here. Not going to try and persuade any individual council member that price doesn't matter. I want to give you a comfort zone that it isn't the only input to the decision. So back to our presentation. So we have 4 pages of projects, and we'll certainly take more questions this evening as we get ready to wrap this up. But we really are looking forward to some time with you in smaller groups in the committees, and I'll be reviewing what that schedule is in a minute. And that'll be a little better time for us to ask more questions about individual projects or about the whole scheme of things, of the projects as a whole. We have just finished today, thanks to the staff, a map to go with the project list. And we need to get this map to you. I don't think we have yet. Have we, Dave? No, I just got it about 2 hours ago. Well, no, about 4 hours ago. Last 2 hours, I've been sitting in traffic. We will get you this map, and it works with your list. So if you see OT2 up there, that's the OT2 project we were talking about. So you can match up the codes on the list with the codes on the map, and it will show you where they're located and the type of projects, okay? It's very much like the map that Torsten did for us, matching up the road projects with their location in the city, okay? So that's all I have to share with you about the multimodal project list. It's a lot to absorb, but we're going to have committee meetings, 3 of them, so we can do it one-on-one or 3-on-1 with you and get into more detail. What I want to do before I let you go is I want to talk about, as promised, the road project costs, because as we've looked at the list in the past, we had partial costs, we didn't have total costs. We now have a list of 25 projects. This is the one that was from model run number 3 that would get us, it would fix everything except 6 intersections. 16 of those projects are from your TIP, your Transportation Improvement Program. Every year, you as a council get a fresh, updated list from your staff, and it changes priorities and some of the costs change. We are right up to the minute. The one that you adopted this summer, this June, is now the basis for the cost that we've put into this list. 2 of the projects that were in your adopted TIP, you remember when Torsten said, could he have your permission to tweak some of them where we were either building too much or building it in the wrong location? You said, give it a try. Again, you weren't amending the TIP, but you're letting us experiment with it. He did change 2 of those projects. And so the project costs from those were developed by the costing analysts in his firm. And then there were 7 new projects that he added where, in order to fix some of those 17 broken intersections, we needed a solution that nobody had thought of and hadn't been in the TIP before. And again, his firm prepared up-to-date cost estimates for those. So what we have in front of us is now a list of $255 million worth of costs, compared to closer to $300 million when I was doing my original estimates. This list has one important adjustment that has already been made. When I do my work for impact fees, I'm required to help you comply with a couple of very specific legal limitations on impact fees. One of them is you can charge new development for its fair share, but you cannot charge new development to fix a problem that we already have. Now, if we have a problem that already exists, and the solution not only fixes our problem, but adds capacity for new traffic, then we can split that cost. And we can charge new traffic for its share as long as somebody else pays for the existing share. It turns out that the list, as it came to me, was about $261 or $262 million, about $6 or $7 million more than what you're seeing here tonight. That's because I went through and did the deficiency reduction of a half a dozen projects that do have existing deficiencies, did the exact math, took the dollar amount off the table. So this is a number that is prospectively chargeable to development. We've taken off the piece that we're not allowed to charge to new development, okay? So with that road project costs, that cost list is part of your package for this evening. It is attachment C, and I don't think, nope, I didn't do a slide on that. It looks like the project list you've seen before, but we've added a column with the costs for it. And this is the up-to-the-minute cost from year 2015 to 2020 TIP, plus the cost estimates from Torsten's firm for the projects that were either revised or we were pricing out from scratch. And so at this point, I don't think, clearly as always, we'll entertain any questions you have tonight and at council meetings about the cost estimates and where did they come from and why is it this and that and the other thing. Tonight, again, we don't have the technical team here to drill down into, well, what cost did you use per acre for right-of-way, and those are experts who are not with us tonight. What I want to do to wrap things up is to remind you of where we're going from here. We will be back in front of the same three committees, Land and Shore, Infrastructure, Services, and Safety. The schedule that we have is September 9, Land and Shore, then Infrastructure September 18, and Services and Safety October 2. September 9, that would be tomorrow, and if your agenda is full, we could move it off to a later date at your convenience, but we're ready to be there and get started. I'm getting a thumbs up from the chair, so I assume we will be there. Okay, good. And then infrastructure, we'll see you on the 18th of September, a little over a week later, and then early October for services and safety. And then after that,
Before you move on, excuse me.
please.
Does anybody see any conflicts? I mean, or know that they're going to miss any of their committee meetings? Yes, Mary Lou?
October 1st or 2nd, Land and Shore, and the October 13th work session.
Okay, okay. Yes, Nina?
See a conflict on October 2nd, I'm so sorry not to.
For services and safety. And I have the same conflict, and you and I are both on services and safety. I will be out of town that week.
Yeah, I'm leaving out of town.
Well, if you wish to reschedule that, just work with the staff and we'll find
Let's
a,
look at moving that out a week, maybe?
To the following week, which would be the 9th?
2 plus 7 is 9, yes, that would work. I'll,
Look at the 9th.
But that's a bigger issue of redoing the services and safety schedule. Yes, yes.
October, we're going to have our budget.
Is it already on the calendar?
Okay.
The 9th?
And I know that there's an infrastructure meeting that was slated in October for you to come to.
Yes.
That date, I believe, conflicts with a budget meeting.
Okay.
So there won't be a committee meeting that night, and we'll have to pick a different night for that committee meeting, just a
Perfect.
heads up.
thank you for sharing all this with us. We
So
built
we'll
this
work
schedule.
here.
We built the schedule based on your originally announced, third Thursday of the month kind of stuff. We will work with you to accommodate your schedule so we get 2 more rounds with each committee.
Okay. Thank you. Yes. Stacy?
I just have a question. The bike ped plan we haven't seen that yet. I suspect that many of the items that are in this list might be in that plan.
Yes.
And what's the schedule for rolling that out?
That is scheduled to come to the committee of the whole meeting very soon.
Okay,
And I think it's this month or
Next Tuesday at the Cal.
Tuesday.
fantastic. Thank you.
So we are working
Let
with
the
that
rest of our council members know.
Planning
Yeah.
calendar.
next Tuesday.
Great.
And then the next meeting with you as a group, scheduled for October 13th, has a very rich agenda because this should finish the package of things that you will see for the first time. And then again, we'll see you in individual committees. Then we'll be back in front of the whole council for a formal agenda bill package that will then go back to committees and then come back to the full council in December for action. So there's plenty of time after you see everything for the first time, you get a second and a third and fourth view of it before you're asked to really make the final decisions. But just look at that agenda for October 13th. We will know then whether the number is $19,000 a trip or whether it's $9,000 a trip or $90,000 a trip. We will know, and we will have that for you, and it'll be part of your package, and we can all bring our smelling salts and figure out what to do about that, okay? We will also have as part of that the multimodal mitigation fee, which, by the way, is part of that $19,000 total. It's combined, okay? We will have the new park impact fees updating the residential portion, and as a reminder, we'll also be bringing you for the first time in your experience a park impact fee that would be charged to commercial property, okay? And then we'll be developing funding strategies because, as we've talked about throughout all of this, We're not allowed to charge all of this stuff to impact fees, which means we have to find ways to fund it on our own. We certainly have had good luck getting grants for some of these, and we'll continue to do that, but we may have to dig deeper and look for strategies that involve city money. And Finance Director Diane and I will be working on strategies to bring you in October as part of the package, and then again, working with the committees. What do you like? What doesn't work for you? What is your appetite for some of these strategies? That is our presentation for this evening. Happy to answer any more questions you might have.
Okay, before we I do have one thing I'd like to start. You mentioned earlier about whether it is what's the number versus what's the level of service. What's the number? How does that compare to my neighbors versus what's the level of service? And I think when you spoke, Randy, about references to your experience on the real, what is the impact of impact fees or overall fees to an overall project cost, and what does it do to development? You cited our other cities, nearby cities. I'm contending for something really fascinating here. So I think lights are on, the mics are working. So, but I think, and this is, I'm directing it, I guess, to Charlie and Bob, that I think it would help me very much to see a more holistic picture of the costs of starting or, bringing development. And transportation, I mean, the whole set of impact fees, but other, I remember when we did an update to the development services fees for the permitting. Am I saying that right? General permitting, that, we did some example projects and we saw what the overall, what it might look like from the perspective of the developer. And, I would like to have, I think it'd be very helpful for us, not only to kind of see some, straw man projects, but also how that picture looks compared to the neighbors as well. So not just the traffic impact.
If I might,
And I'm sorry, let me just, and I'm not really biased one way. This is information gathering. I just want to understand it. I'd like to try to walk in the shoes of someone who's thinking about bringing a business or building some homes and doing some business in Issaquah. I think that's the way we need to look at it. I'm sorry, Randy.
well, I was actually going to affirm that that's a question that I've had many times before. And have had the privilege of working with staff to develop a variety of different kinds of answers and do the research, or have the staff do the research so that those answers are available. We're just wrapping up a project for the city of Shoreline in which their economic development department did exactly that kind of a study. They selected 9 or 10 cities in the central Puget Sound, came up with 3 or 4 straw man development projects, researched what all those different costs are, and it's wild. They're all over the place. What's interesting is the totals aren't all that wildly different, but individually, one will have a high sewer fee and another one a high park fee, but in the end, everybody's charging fees in order to make the public infrastructure work. But you need to know what you look like in comparison to cities that are comparable for you, and I'm happy to have the question asked, and I will work with the staff to get something for you. And Shoreline's just the one that comes to mind because we just finished it, but we've done a number of these. It's a perfectly rational question to ask about how do we fit into the whole scheme of things, not just impact fees.
Thank you. Nina?
Well, my first question leverages Paul's comments, and that was is it appropriate or productive to think about impact fees in the range that they might be, and how they affect the likelihood of certain size businesses, and are they more incenting or disincentivizing to a certain size or type of business, maybe the kind that we would prefer. You might say that the giant corporate big companies won't be discouraged by an impact fee that we pick, but we might say, well, hey, we want to be a collection of diversity and a lot of little businesses. I'm just saying that as a, for instance, not as a truth, is there a breaking point where one size, perhaps, business would work better or not with the impact fees? So that was one of my questions. The other has to do with when we're looking at the road projects cost in particular and the growth cost, I think you mentioned it, Randy, Mike, a side concern on there is, well, then how much does it cost us? Because that project relates to a project that has fix-it costs rather than growth impact costs. So if we committed to a list, then what's the cost to us and how do we figure that out? Or the question is, how do we figure that out and when do we do that?
The fix-it part of fixing something that's already deficient on the $255 million list, we subtracted that amount. We already did that calculation. It was about $6 million. The list before we took off the deficiencies was about $261 million. How we do it, I promise to keep this real short, or we can get into more detail in front of committee because this is going to get technical real fast. But we use the traffic model, and it tells us how many trips are going through an intersection or going up and down a road right now. And we also know what its design capacity is at your accepted level of service. So if it's designed to take 1,000 cars during the PM peak hour, and it's got 1,100 cars on it, that's 100 cars over its limit. So that's a 100 trip deficiency. Now, if we're going to build a new project with the capacity for 500 more vehicles, the first 100 are the folks that are already there. So 100 out of the 500 is the deficiency. 100 out of 500, 20%. So we assign 20% of the project cost to the deficiency category. We did that analysis for all of your projects, and it came up at about $6 million. To your point about size, again, I'll just do a short answer now, and we can get into it more in committee and at later meetings. Size is a real challenge for small businesses, and you know, my late uncle, who built houses one house at a time in North Bend and who used to live up on Newport Way here, you know, somebody's building one house, having to come in and pay $6,000, $8,000, $10,000, and maybe if we raise the fees, $15,000, $20,000 for a single family house. Yeah, he's going to pass that price along, but he's going to have to find somebody who can pay that higher price. So size for residential, now back size for business, definitely. If somebody's going to open a small boutique type store or a small law firm or a small whatever, and they need business space, an impact fee can look like a lot of money. But we've learned something really interesting about very small businesses. They almost never build a new building from scratch to start their business. So they are rarely the ones who are facing an impact fee. Usually they're moving into an existing vacant building and using that on which either no impact fee was ever charged, or it was paid 30 years ago, or it was paid by the builder of a new building as a shell, created the tenant improvements and so forth. So we'll get more information for you later, but surprisingly it has a very small effect on most small businesses because very few of them bump into it because they're not well off enough to be thinking about building 10,000 square foot building or 50,000 square foot building.
I have one more question.
Okay.
It involves the road project list and the Costco development agreement and the MTFA. If the Costco development agreement goes through in some form like it looks like today, are those numbers in here, and do they get removed and be put on another management tool? You want to answer that later? I'll throw that out there. That's just something I was thinking about.
Yeah, and I can't help you with that. I'm not
Yeah,
part of those
fine.
negotiations.
Writing it down.
Right.
Thank you.
Tola?
Yeah, I have two questions. This first one you may have answered, but I'm not sure I understood it. So with multimodal, we had a 10% improvement target, right?
Yes.
And how do we feel that corresponds to the $78 million worth of all options in front of us?
It's only 74, please, yes. It's a lot of money, 74 million. And the answer is we don't have that direct answer for you tonight, just like when Torsten came back and gave you the chart of many colors, and this is what happened to levels of service. It's harder to do for non-motorized,
Sure.
but we do have some criteria, and we will have those for the October 13th session. We might have them for some committee sessions beforehand, but we don't have them tonight.
Okay, thank you. And the second question is, you mentioned the fee for somebody who's building a house, and so you pass that on. Does that have implications for workforce housing? And does Arch have any skin in the game as municipalities consider consider these sorts of things?
I can actually help with that a little. I've just finished a project for Arch, thinking about looking for new durable revenue sources for Arch member cities and their programs. And we did talk about a variety of impact fee forgiveness or waivers or discounts or whatever. State law already allows that. I mentioned our very, very fresh project in Shoreline. The affordable housing, the workforce housing advocates were in front of the city council providing very strong support for exactly that kind of an exemption, which the law allows. And happily for us, the law got changed on that. The original exemption for low-income housing said if you, the city, exempt them, then you, the city, have to bring a checkbook and write that impact fee check into the impact fee account on their behalf so that the account is made whole, the impact's still there, and you had to pay for it. And the legislature just a few years ago revised that and said you can actually exempt up to 80% and not have to make it up. If you go to a full 100% discount, you have to make up the 20%.
Thank you.
Sorry, Randy, who can you do that for?
Low-income housing, and each city is allowed to establish its own definition of low-income housing. So we've had cities limited strictly to nonprofits like Habitat for Humanity. The housing advocacy folks made a great case in Shoreline that a number of the workforce and affordable housing projects that come out of the ground, and there's never a lot of them, really hard to bundle the financing for, but they will be a combination of various funding sources from public and nonprofit sources, but often there is a private partner involved. And so that private partner may not be the lead contractor, they may not be making a profit on the construction, but they're a player. And if you wrote it that it's only eligible for entirely nonprofits, it would have disqualified that. And it was a real eye-opener for the Shoreline City Council, and so they changed the definitions. We have some good working definitions that I think King County wrote that we can provide you when we get to that point, so that you have a broad enough scope to capture the folks that you'd want to be proposing to you, and not just nonprofits.
Thank you. Any other questions from the council? Okay, seeing none. Is any more staff? I'm not seeing anything, so I believe, thank you, Randy.
My pleasure.
I assume you may be hanging around, but if you're not, enjoy your walk back uptown to wherever your car is.
Terrific.
Yeah, thanks so much. So next on our agenda is a presentation and discussion from our colleagues from Eastside Fire and Rescue. And this topic, so I'll say a few words, and Eileen, if you want to fill in for me, is that just like we, the city, are on the threshold of budget season, Eastside Fire and Rescue is in that same phase, and I believe I'm sure there's a preliminary budget. I know that, I don't know the full process through which it was deliberated and how it is finalized. Maybe we'll learn a little bit more about this tonight, but we're in advance of it coming before the board, and we have our two representatives, Eileen and Mary Lou, will be addressing this question on behalf of our council, our city, at a future EFR board meeting. And so our hope tonight is to everybody become more familiar with the proposal and get our questions asked, and to hopefully be an assistance to Mary Lou and Eileen on guidance for when you consider the question as at the next or at the future board meeting. So I think we asked for a presentation of the proposed budget, and I noticed that the ILA agreement is in here, so I look forward to understanding that. And one other thing, and I had asked in particular, was by way of comparison, we have actually here at the City of Issaquah a set of financial policies. And we just reviewed them and updated them last year, and it's a very helpful tool. So if there's something, like that, some type of guiding set of policies for your budget process, if you have information or can at least share, talk with them about us, that'd be very helpful. But anyway, that's my introduction. Greg Tryon is here to lead the conversation. Wes is here to join him. And so we couldn't be served by two more dedicated individuals. And I'll turn it over to you.
I want to start off by saying the traffic isn't our fault. It was a different
So that was
police
outside.
jurisdiction.
It was.
Yes, it was.
It was really good you clarified
I
that, because we
just
weren't
wanted to
sure
make
if
sure.
this was a multimodal or an EFR issue.
No, it's been a tanker truck dumped a bunch of fuel on top of Tiger Mountain. So they didn't realize how much was involved until a little bit later. Then they called help. So that's what's going on. Response to your comment about the policies, one of the other things that was sent with that ILA is a process that the EFR board uses that sort of establishes how it gets reviewed and then gets adopted, the process that way. So that was also included with that. Starting off with, looking at a budget schedule here, our process is established. Each year this goes out so everybody's on the same page about how we plan to march through this process. And once we get to the end of May and we host that finance director's budget review, our budget is roughly set. The things that we don't know about are the revenues, like we're still waiting for the King County EMS levy, which we expect to have the answers to that by the end of the month. And I'll talk a little bit that as we get closer to it. But there are a number of things, as you guys deal with as well, which is King County assessments, et cetera, that we're waiting for those numbers as we try to establish budgets. But pretty much by the end of May, we've established what the framework of our budget is, and that's when we start going into the committee process. This year was a little different, and we didn't necessarily follow what we did because there was an establishment of the operations committee that was created by the EFR board. In creating that got a late start, which normally right now the finance committee, the normal standing committee, would have already looked at this budget, presenting it to the EFR board this month, which is coming on Thursday. The finance committee hasn't seen it yet because they've been waiting for the ops committee, which just in their last meeting said, okay, we're going to send a budget, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. And like everything else, we have the requirements in October to start setting revenue funding as well as then getting to the expenditure side of things, so some statutes that way that we have to follow. And then, once again, we have to finalize a budget by the end of December. I was going to start with revenue, but it was pointed out to me by somebody that reviewed, I'll start with the expense and I'll come back to the revenue to sort of make a little more sense here in a moment. Overall, the operating fund, which is everything that we do, is increasing by 2.86%. Here are the assumptions that are driving that. 2.5% wage, that's based on contract negotiations that are ongoing at this moment. So that remains to be seen. When we look at our comparables, we're 2.5% behind. Our firefighters 2.5% to 3% behind, depending what set of comparables you use. So we're in the ballpark of what we expected to be a potential. We have some minor increases. Contractually, we're held to only a 6% medical increase. Anything above that, the employees are paying for that difference. So contractually, we have a call going on. Okay. And the same with our dental. We've limited through contractual means, so that's one way we do cost control, is that. We know from Norcom that we're getting this type of increase. That's already plugged into. Norcom is our dispatch agency. So we use, it's based out of Bellevue, and they, like everything else, they provide what their budget is. They send it to us, which any cost increases then get included to the partner revenues or partner shares. One of the things, and I'll get to, which makes not so much sense here, but there's going to be an increase to the volunteer program, and that was recommended by the Ops Committee. In a moment, I'll get to the Ops Committee. But one of the big questions was, as we went through kind of it was a tough headquarters restructure. We've had 5 positions restructured. Ultimately, we lost 3 people from our organization in the headquarters staff. Our public information officer, our EMS coordinator, and our receptionist. So their positions aren't funded in 2015. So that savings is listed here. I would love to have a percentage for you, but they're in 3 different divisions right now, and my finance director is sick as a dog, so I couldn't get them out of him in short order, but I can get that information for you if it makes a bigger sense to you. But this is something that you'd be looking to going forward annually. Those positions are no longer with us. So on the revenue side, we saw this 2.86%, that's overall to the whole agency. To the partners, that means you're receiving a cost in totality, a 3.5% plus increase. And the reason for that difference is because some of our revenues are lower, which is one of those revenues is something that the city has the ability to make up for and has been making up for in the past, which is fire inspection and permit fees. So the city gets to bill through its building department as it sees fit and maintains that money. They no longer turn it over to Eastside Fire. So your city, your building department maintains that. So it sits with what your needs are. Equipment replacement fund, 3.9.4%. Normally we set it at a 3% annual because that's what fire apparatus costs go. A new aid car, a new fire engine, those types of things we see are annually 3% cost. It doesn't seem to matter what the cost of living is. That's what the growth is. It's a little more this year because, again, a reduced revenue. Last year we had $100,000 in revenue of selling surplus. This year it's about $85,000. So that's why there's this little bump, because those surplus costs offset your future fees or your future impacts. Capital Facilities Maintenance Fund is funded to the level we want it to be. I just talked about the plan review that the cities get to keep. So Issaquah looks at a $96,000 revenue. That's going directly to the city. It doesn't go now on to EFR. That's maintained as you see fit. Again, talking about the 2% increase, if it's less, we'll have to adjust the budget somehow, which usually means we're going to have to cut the budget someplace to maintain because we're kind of late in your budget process as well. So this is what 2015 partnership contributions look like. It's kind of a little overwhelming. Let me grab my high-tech laser here. So these numbers here are your share of Eastside Fire and Rescue. Fire District 10 still makes up the most of about 1/3 of the cost of EFR. So they're paying 1/3 of the cost of Eastside Fire and Rescue. You are now the second largest in share. Sammamish is close. The two Fire District 38 out in North Bend area and the city of North Bend itself. Our 3 budgets that we maintain are right here. So this is the cost to the city of Issaquah. This is that area that you were talking about when you know that Fire District 10 is moving a fire station in May Valley. That's going to impact your cost. Those costs go up by $500,000. What that really means is that Station 71 across the street here, the city of Issaquah is picking up more of the cost, whereas District 10 used to share more of it, almost half of it, 45% of it. They're only going to share 25% of it because they're no longer responding as much into Fire District 10 areas. And that's part of that interlocal agreement, talks about how we share calls, how we fund the fire stations.
Greg?
Yes, ma'am.
That number there is including that change?
Yes.
Okay.
It is, including that change. You can, yes. So the funding model that was voted on is a new funding model starting in 2015. 85% of it is based on assessed valuations. 15% of it is based on calls. And I'm going to talk about smoothing here in a second, but we're moving along to this new funding model. The full funding model will impact in 2016. Talk a little bit about that as well. So you can see that this is the cost increase, which you're aware of, to the City of Issaquah. Any questions to this slide? So one of the things that was created by the board was an operations committee. The operations committee is a mix of elected officials and either city managers or administrators or finance directors. Diane Marcotte for City of Issaquah sits in on the ops committee. And their purpose was to drill down into the weeds. Let's go through the entire budget, not just operate at a 50,000-foot level, but go through each line item. And so, in fact, and I've got it sitting actually now in Wes's lap, are a series of questions. They looked at everything. They looked at education, training, everything that we do, they went through. They focused on information technology. They focused on how we repair and maintain our fire engines. And the types of questions that they were looking at, is it better to partner with information technology? Is there some way better to do maintenance? And so up until just about a month or so ago, EFR and City of Issaquah were working together to see if we could share maintenance facilities. Could we work together to do this? The problem is we're right at the level of what we can do, and either one to take on the other, it's a big capital fee, so it's about another $3 million to make it happen. So we had to go, maybe not at this time. But that's one of the things they looked at. Overtime, they went through every line item that we spend on overtime dollars. Is there a way to do it on duty versus off duty? And so we were able to, over the last 2 months, answer all of their questions for the most part, and I'll get to that in a moment, to why we spend money on overtime. Training, again, can we train on duty? What types of training do we have to do versus just want to do? We went through each of those. And again, medical. There was various partners brought in what their cities do for their contracted employees. And so we talked about what types of potential impacts that could have to our organizations. A quote that came out of the Ops Committee from the committee chair was, they didn't find a pot of gold. They also didn't find any areas of reductions that they wanted to come out of the budget. But they did make several recommendations. Due to some of the changing practices, and working with the City of Issaquah is one of those, at some point we need to purchase ballistic vests for our firefighters. The expectation now is that when we respond to calls, which the City of Issaquah has had several, between the gentleman walking down Front Street with a rifle to the shooting at the state park, number of domestic violence, we're now facing those same situations that the police officers are. How do we fund that? And they came up with a recommendation out of reserve funds, so not out of the operating budget. These other items were going to be moved to the equipment replacement fund. This is about $130,000 impact, but it's already being accounted for, so we're purchasing them in a different manner. This volunteer training, which you saw a couple slides ago, was the $50,000. In order to try to lower the cost of service to Eastside Fire Partners, the parties of, we try to maximize the use of our volunteer program. And one of the ways we can do that is by improving their training. And that creates a buy-in on their part. They spend more time with our organization, hopefully longer. And in order to do that, we had to add more money. Because one of the things that goes in the City of Issaquah as a benefit of this is we have volunteers who sleep at the fire station at the top of Tiger Mountain. So if there is a need to transport our patients, that volunteer unit can do that, keeping our career crew in service in the city, serving the community for the next big event that might happen. They did recommend 3 areas of further research, and by further research, They're hoping that the EFR board will come back and say that we want a RFP go out for information technology. We spend about $145,000 to $197,000 if you include everything on information technology. So is there a way to, again, partner with somebody, City of Issaquah, City of Sammamish, North Bend, or whomever? Is there a different way to do this? Is there cost savings? So we're in the process of looking through how we would do that as an RFP. So we're working towards that.
Was that number capital, maintenance, or?
It was everything.
Labor?
It was everything. And Wes is in charge of that particular budget, but
Okay, that's good.
it is everything. Training overtime review, there was a question of $100,000. Exactly what did $100,000 purchase us in overtime? And so I've been in the process of answering that question, and so that's still an ongoing answering process. Literally getting down to what did we spend 3.5 hours of overtime on? That's how drilled down we're getting on this particular question. Contractual items, which I won't speak a lot about here tonight, but they had some suggestions about what to take into the negotiation process that's ongoing right now that they would like to see at least brought up into the negotiation process. So. Okay. So they're going to make their recommendation on Thursday, the 11th. From there, the EFR board will turn over to the Finance Committee, which is elected members of the board, to go over that recommended budget for 2015. From there, they can bring it back to the EFR board in the October meeting and then start the whole board deliberations over what the budget should be or shouldn't be. Okay.
Greg?
Yes, sir.
Has there been any conversation about whether a vehicle emergency response fee could offset some of the cost increases? It's been talked about for years, and even to some partial degree, it seems like it would help offset some of those increases.
We've had a little bit of discussion. One of Londi Lindell from North Bend has experience with administering an ambulance fee, is what the City of Mercer Island identified. We're kind of looking into it because we're providing some of the data for them to figure out, you know, what is the level, because they focused it on their adult living facilities and their nursing homes, figuring out. When we go through it, this city in particular, but Eastside Fire and Rescue's response area actually has a very active program with the county for getting into those adult living facilities. Matter of fact, the county is going to adopt one of our programs that one of our firefighters created to reduce calls, but that is something that we're looking at. We're still trying to develop enough numbers and data to go, is that the way to go?
Would that be for, you mentioned like assisted living facilities, et cetera, and I was thinking more along the lines of like a vehicle accident response fee?
When we looked at it, the first couple times that it's been brought to the board in general has said no. It doesn't mean that we can't bring it back up again, but it has been turned down a couple times by the board that they said no.
Would there be a way to do an analysis of how much funding could be obtained if that were in place? In other words, you know, if it was a significant number, maybe that would change some heads.
We did. We actually provided several sets of numbers, and the number was just on the tip of my brain and it's gone. It wasn't as much as we hoped for, but as you know, with all these budgets, pennies add up to dollars and dollars add up to quite a bit. So it was some amount, but it wasn't as much as we'd hoped for. But we did provide that data, and I'll see if I can find that, because we do have a study on it, so I'll go.
Thank you, Josh. Any other questions? Okay. Back to you, Greg.
Okay.
Well, just a follow-up.
Yep.
Sure, Mary Lou.
Do you remember, Greg, what the board rationale was for turning that down, or like looking at it and saying no?
A number of things. Some of it was the argument of continuing to add more and more fees to things. What is the level of what people's basic taxes pay for? There is some limitation to it has to basically be applied to everybody, and that's kind of, I think, was the biggest stumbling block. There was this thought that, oh, you would just apply it to people who are along Interstate 90 and don't live in, Eastside Fire and Rescue. And that part you can't do. And that really seemed to be a big stumbling block for a number of board members. And then the sheer cost of it, or the income revenue of it, was not felt to be enough to overcome the negative. Now, having said that, there was some of the same arguments about charging for transports. And our view of charging for transports is an equity thing, because we would put in about a third to almost half of our patients into a private ambulance who got a bill, but we wouldn't bill when we took them on our own. And so there was an inequity. We couldn't decide who was going to go or not go, so now we bill across. And we've actually had, for us, we have a very high collection rate because we have a very high insurance covered population. There are others in neighboring communities that don't have that and struggle to get costs back. But that's what their loudest argument was about.
All right, thank you.
Did I get either high enough or not far enough down in your budget so far questions? I do have some handouts I can give of what the budget looks like going forth in some very high-level numbers, so you can have it to look at and ask questions from if that will be helpful. But
My sense is, this is just me thinking, seeing the schedule up here, it hasn't been reviewed by the Finance Committee. It hasn't been formally proposed to the board yet. So it seems to me that would be, interesting information, but my sense is we may not be in a good position to comment on it because it's going through your process and going through your committee process. At least that's my reaction. I mean, you can pass, you brought them, you can pass them out, but I just do question how much value we could have in the actual details. I do wonder, could you address, so I think it's like five slides back.
yes.
The actual, there, okay, 3.
Okay.
And so talk about the, again, the funding formula.
So starting in 2015 is a, I could bring up the dry erase board and cut it out, but prior to 2015, Station 71 is a great example. 55% of that cost of that fire station is borne by the city of Issaquah because 55% of the calls were responding to city of Issaquah. Well, actually, no, excuse me, I'll take a step back because it's not on calls. He's about to jump out and say, no. Its first 2 response area, 55% of the assessed valuation that's protected by that station is in the city of Issaquah. 45% of it is outside in Fire District 10. That's for the 2014 prior to 1999 when Eastside Fire was created. During last year's process of the interlocal agreement, there was some desire to say, well, there should be some measure of responses because responses have an impact on utilization. So starting next year, 2015, we're smoothing to this new total, which is going to be my 7.5%, so 92.5% of Station 71's costs are apportioned out by that same AV model. Based on that response area, is that. The other 7.5% are going to be on calls. So Station 71, just on call responses, runs roughly 5 to 6 calls a day. So they would start apportioning those calls to where they go. To an Issaquah, to a District 10, to Sammamish. There's some cost sharing that way. In 2016, it will be down to 85% assessed valuation component, and 15% is going to be on responses. Now, to make it a little more challenging here, Station 72, which is on Maple Street, as well as Station 81 in Sammamish, have an additional sort of offset. Because those 2 fire stations get moved up to cover each other, cover the other partners a lot. The parties in Eastside Fire and Rescue, felt that Issaquah and Sammamish should have some cost offset to the cost of Station 72, Station 81. So 25% of the cost of the Maple Street Fire Station is borne by all the partners. No matter whether that station normally responds to their area or not, they're helping offset the cost of your Maple Street Fire Station. Sort of that sharing, because it's the regional view of those, you and Sammamish have the capacity to help cover the rest of the region. So that's where that offset is. So it gets a little confusing in there, and that is in that last bit of that ILA that you guys have. The new funding formula talks about that and has some examples of money put into it. Clear as mud.
No, I do assume everybody has at least have some familiarity with the AV, or assessed value model, based upon valuation of your property, and
Yeah.
you add the whole thing up in the coverage area and the percent, and you said
And it's
55% of,
percentage, yeah.
55%
Yep.
is within Issaquah for this station here.
And
for
in
example.
2015, when that station on May Valley moves, 75% of the protected area will be in Issaquah, and only 25% will be in District 10. Because that May Valley Fire Station will now take over paying for itself and cover its own response area, which gives, Station 71 here was getting close to the point of needing an additional crew to respond to calls, because its availability was starting to drop to an area where we'd have to start looking long-term at providing an aid crew, a two-person, not another whole nother three-person crew, but just to cover the calls. This postpones that. So it's a cost avoidance to you guys, yes, $500,000 more, but you're also not having to then add a crew on top of it, because they're getting one call a day back to their ability to cover.
Okay.
There's a couple other things that were asked to go over, some emerging issues. One of them we've just been talking about that do have impacts financially to Issaquah. District 10, because it is an unincorporated area, you know very well, Kalahani, has an impact when that gets annexed. There are other areas on Cougar Mountain that still could potentially be annexed out of District 10, either into Bellevue or potentially, Issaquah if they felt a need to, but most likely Bellevue. Bellevue's just about done grabbing what it can, but Renton is moving in a couple areas as well. So that starts to impact how much the Fire Station 72 on Maple covers. So right now it's a 90-10. 72 covers 90% of Issaquah and 10% District 10. It might bump up to 92, 93%, which means there's more cost to you. You're getting close to, in Station 72, funding the whole cost of the station. Right now you have a partner that's sharing that cost. Smoothing, we just talked about that. Okay.
Hey,
That's
Greg,
good.
before you
Yep.
move off that, I'm still thinking about the station move in May Valley.
Okay.
So I understand the AV component, and I think you said that it'll actually reduce the demand on this station right here.
Yep.
So it'll reduce the demand on this station right here, and our costs go up 500,000. Okay, that's, somehow I'm missing the logic, but I just want to make sure I understand that.
Okay.
I mean, it's a result of the funding model based upon AV, and some of it calls the service. I know that you're going to be phasing that in two-year cycles, right? I think in two-year phase for the 7.5%, and then up to
Yep.
full 15.
So one of the examples that I like to use is that in the Eastside Fire model, a fire station costs about $2.3 million a year to operate. If we go to Mercer Island, if we go to Bellevue, we go to Redmond, that number is somewhere between $2.7 and $3.4 million a year to operate a fire station. So being part of Eastside Fire, there's the savings just because of that. Currently, if you go, getting closer to your 5 now, if we go back to this number here, if you just had your own fire department in a less expensive EFR model, it would be $6.9 million based on the comprehensive plan that says your fire stations are where you need them to be to service your citizens. So there is either a cost avoidance or a savings, depending on how you want to view it, of $700,000+ annually, and that's in the EFR model. If you, again, went to Mercer Island, it's about $3.2 million from the study that Sammamish did last year. So you're right. Your costs are going up for a perceived no change in level of service.
Yeah, and the purpose for the question was, I recognize that that is done. That's part of the agreement. Now we're just doing the accounting. I think as much as anything, it's just a greater and broader understanding for this council on the strategic, long-term, big issues that or decisions that are made and how they affect us and how they affect our budget and our citizens. I mean, so it's not so much, okay, a 2015 budget matter anymore. I think we all just need to understand the bigger picture as well.
Okay.
Paul, can I
Yep.
follow up on your question?
I'm sorry?
Can I follow up on your original question?
Please.
Greg, for the Sunset Station then, if trending back 2, 3, 4, 5 years, the calls at the station were growing and we were going to add another crew or potentially would have had to add another crew, why is that? Is that growth? Is that something we would have collected impact fees for to offset those costs, or why were the calls going up?
Excuse me, for the most part, it's growth in population, but the simplest thing I can say is just an increased utilization. So one of the things that we've tried to do to offset that without adding crews is we partnered with King County and did a trial study to do that community medical technician program. So we'd have one EMT that could go spend 20, 30 minutes with somebody and try to find what social services would be better use in serving that customer instead of an expensive fire engine responding to their house. So that's the types of things we do, but it's an increased utilization. Some of it was need, some of it is just population. And that's one of the things, going forth with the city of Issaquah is your central Issaquah plan, is that growth. And if you become an urban area designation, then you've got additional potential growth that you're going to have to manage. And some of that, you offset, we talked about in the past, is if you can put sprinklers in buildings and if you can train people to do first aid and CPR, you can cap or slow the growth of your fire department and your emergency services. I mean, that's the best way if we can have this safer city where everybody knows how to do CPR, knows how to do first aid. You reduce the need for this ongoing growth in certain areas, and that's kind of where we would say. The point is that Station 71 was getting close to that point where there was too many calls, meaning they were missing the next call, so the next closest station had to come to that call, which meant that the next closest station to them had to go to that person's call because they were serving the Issaquah call because the other Issaquah crew was out.
So, is it okay to ask Bob a question?
Of course.
Well, so I guess for me, when I hear that it's population, I think then if it's growth and more people, why don't we have fees that we could be adding to our pot of money to pay the bill? Like, what's been the trend with that over the last 5 years? Or is it population growth, or is it just more calls, different types of calls, different types of responses?
For the medical responses?
Yeah, I guess the part that I'm getting hung up on is that if we had a station that was getting busier, shouldn't we have had a revenue stream that was, if it's population growth for one thing, that helped to cover the cost of the increases? And then I take it the next step further is that if now it's going to be less busy, then I'm concerned about having it the same way it is right now, staffed the way it is, if we know actually part of its work is gonna be done by somebody else. So two parts to it. What happened? Why did it get busier? And do we have money or
So
what do next?
in terms of actual, usage, population may or may not always have an impact on number of calls, because it depends on the types of calls that there are. One of the things that we've done, for example, particularly with the multifamilies that have gone in, we required sprinkling of all the systems. So that's a code item that we've required that should reduce the number of fire calls that we actually have. One of the biggest challenges that we have, we'll be talking a little bit about it in the budget process this year, is that under state law, we're allowed to go up to $1.50 for the mill rate on property taxes. We're substantially below that overall as a city, but the amount of that, a mill rate that goes to fire services has been increasing substantially during that time. So essentially, one of the things that's occurring in the general fund is that fire services are eating more and more of the available revenue that could go to fund other services, because they're just chewing up more and more of the millage rate. So it's one of the challenges that we're facing overall when we look at our financial picture, is that more and more of the standard, and it's already limited by the 1% increase every year, but the standard revenue we get from property taxes is going to fire services versus funding some of the other services in the
So,
city.
and then over the last 5 years, in terms of impact fees, we haven't been collecting many. That hasn't been a revenue source for us to offset increased activity at the fire station?
So the impact fees can only be used for capital expenses?
Yeah.
Building station.
Yeah, so we
We
have.
don't have a need for more fire stations, so,
Yeah, we do have some, and we track those. We do have some cash.
yep, about $1
Is it
million.
I was going to say, yeah,
About
it's
$1
$1
million.
million and a little bit more.
Yeah.
That,
So if we don't need capital improvements, we can't collect a fee even if we were adding more staff and stuff at stations?
so you can still collect the fee, but you have to spend it within 7 years. So there is some of that money that's actually aging
Yes,
fairly quickly.
really close.
And so I know the fire department has a list of
That
improvements
station
they'd
needs
like
to be
make.
repaired.
Yeah, essentially to the main station here.
I just want to say with 71, it's always been a busy station. So if you look at its call volume, it really hasn't changed. It's just always bumped along that level of, is there too many calls or not, right in that area. This particular station is very interesting as well. The crew doesn't travel very far to where its customers are. Its use is actually very close to this fire station. Unlike some of the fire stations in Eastside Fire where in North Bend, they might literally travel 50 miles to get to their customer. The 71, most of the calls are actually within a very close level.
So I want to follow up on Mary Lou's question, and the assumption in there, it's based upon growth, or actually, but it's not. It's really it's on history.
Yeah. Sorry, meaning?
Well, call volumes. So how do you do your kind of forecasting for a given? How do you look at the growth? We just got done talking concurrency, and we're planning for growth. That's different than actual growth. It's a plan. Yeah. So if I'm getting ahead of you, please let's go and get there. But I just want to make sure that assumption, Mary Lou, is it actual activity, or I think you said utilization versus growth? How is it that you, which of those that you use to forecast and plan for a station?
What's that? Yeah. As Wes is whispering over here, because he spends a lot of time, a software called Deccan, which produces a lot of information about where your calls are happening, where your growth is, where the traffic infrastructure that you have to allow emergency units to get to those growth centers. That all comes into saying, and we do several models, which says, if it was a perfect world, we didn't care about trying to build a $5 million to a $10 million fire station, where would you put them? Okay, Station 72 on Maple Street is absolutely perfect. You might go across the street if it was absolutely perfect. Long-term planning, what we would love to do, and I'll skip ahead and come back to it here, is that there are some things that we could do. If we are a 7-year fire department, which our ILA makes us, you are not going to spend capital dollars on moving your fire stations. If there was a way to say that Issaquah and Sammamish, you guys are going to act like you're one fire department and plan, you don't have to do anything else, you just sign a memo of understanding that says we agree to plan together. There's 6 fire stations between those two cities. They're where they need to be if they're independent individual cities. But if you could plan like you were a larger fire department, you could probably do with 1 less fire station. You would relocate about 3 of them, possibly 4 of them, which over 20, 30 years would make sense cost-wise. Because when you look at how much you're spending on maintaining that 6th fire station, eventually it's going to pencil out. And you could actually get some better response times to 1 or 2 specific areas. But if you are your own city, your own fire department, you have the 3 fire stations roughly where you need them to be. So that's one of the big questions that we have. And strategic planning for efficiencies, Josh's question about how's the best way to bill? Are we serving the population of Issaquah, whether it's Providence Point or Eastridge House or Tallis or whatever, are we serving them the best with the right types of services? Those are things that we could spend time doing if we got to that point. So that's probably, if in the perfect world, that's where we'd love to be, is be able to be looking past 7 years to really give you the efficiencies that we've already started to get at a lower level. So the one last thing I wanted to, actually, there's 2 last things that we wanted to speak about. Merging issues that has some impacts to Issaquah potentially is a thing called Regional Fire Authority. Fire Districts 10 and 38 are working at combining, either merging together or forming an RFA. And the reason for that is they're getting eaten up by cities, and they need some ability to affect some change in their political world. That's one of the reasons. And they're trying to be as efficient with, instead of having 2 boards, they would like to have 1 board. And that helps, as few cost as that is, that's part of that cost savings that they're looking for. District 10 and District 38, especially District 10, is very interested in partnering with somebody. And they have a long history of partnership with the city of Issaquah, whether it's building fire stations or other collaborative work. They're very interested in seeing if that a regional fire authority makes any sense for the city and have that ability to be involved in the planning process. And so one of the things that we looked at is that the city of Issaquah could actually become part of an RFA, and that $5 to $6 million that you would like to get back into your operations budget or out of your operations budget, however you want to view it, is something that could be done with an RFA. It allows the citizens some direct vote on that, which gives them say in their governance. Plus, then it allows you to structure your fees as you feel necessary. As Bob was saying, is that mill rate, which is taken up basically by fire service, could now then be applied to something else in your city that you want to work on. So that's something that we want to talk about. And the reason why is because even the cities of Mercer Island and Bellevue are talking about what does this look like. They've been part of a training group for about the last 10 years, and in the last 3 years it's become very active. It's become so active that all of their response plans, all of their training plans are all mirrored. So they look exactly, you can't tell the difference between a Mercer Island or a Bellevue plan. They're looking at a regional fire authority. They're trying to discuss if that's the direction they want to go. Kent, down in areas of Federal Way, they have gone to regional fire authorities as a manner in which to solve some of those problems. So that's kind of this big picture that's coming to you, and our neighboring cities are looking at doing that as well. Hence the wave of the future. I want to turn this last part over to Wes. I was asked to provide a little bit of information about something the nonprofit organization that this board or council's seen once before.
So, thank you.
Yep.
And before you do that, Wes, really, actually, technically, this is a walk-on agenda
Okay.
item in that it's beyond just budget related.
Okay.
It has to do with an issue we've addressed in the past. And the past Issaquah Council did, I think, green light.
July of 2013.
We did approve the proposed, the proposal to convert to a nonprofit status for EFR, but that takes all members, and that hasn't gone through all members right now. So I know the issue is back before the board. And so we want to talk about that a little bit. But I just want to make sure, before we move away from budget in general, is that, again, I'm looking at the two of you, Mary Lou and Eileen, that, you know, as our representatives, if you have any, you know, if there are questions you're going to be faced with as board members, and where our council, you know, you would look for guidance. I mean, this is the primary opportunity, you know, to ask your questions, or at least let us know what you are, what questions you have in your mind, or concerns that you have where guidance from the rest of your council may be helpful.
I don't think I have necessarily any questions, but I think the presentation we've had before us this evening has been very, very helpful. And before I got on EFR as a director, listening to a lot of this was sort of like, you know, the deer in the headlights piece. It was like so in-depth, and so everything was layered in regards to how you understood it. So I just think it's a fabulous opportunity. So I want to put it back the reverse way. So if any council members have some questions or concerns that they're not quite understanding, we can have some later conversations. But it also, I think, gives us the ability to bring forward some, as you're saying, asking those questions as something does come up with Eastside Fire and Rescue. There's a great understanding now, or deeper understanding with our council members to understand the process and how it works, so that we can get some good dialogue going on some future issues.
Mary Lou?
I just had a couple of things to add. Right now, Eileen and I are both sitting on two different subcommittees for EFR. Neither one of us is on the Ops Committee, and we do have city representation through Diane Marcotte. Diane and Eileen and Bob and I should be meeting to discuss what she's been hearing in the Operations Committee meeting, and definitely whatever we feel we should bring back to share and ask for more information, we will. But I mirror what Eileen says. If there's other issues that, you know, you would like us to bring back and discuss with Diane through the Operations Committee, we could do that as well.
Okay, and I had one last question for you then. Do you have any type of a 5-year forecast on your budget? Do you do 5-year forecasting?
Yes, we do.
And is that something Diane has access to?
She actually has. So when Scott does his come May, meet the finance directors, that's really what he's talking about. Because part of his questioning is to them, what are you guys seeing for next year, 5 years, 10 years? So each year he's getting that information as well from the cities to see that the EFR budget process is in line with what the cities are seeing.
Okay. And I had said it earlier, and I think one of the reasons even to have this on the agenda item is this, you know, what can we see your financial policies?
Okay.
And again, you know, we have them in a document, and like the one that's just etched into my mind is one of our policies that, at least when it comes to using the general fund, that ongoing revenues will cover ongoing expenses, or ongoing expenses will be covered by ongoing revenues instead of using one-time revenues to cover, you know, ongoing expenses. That's one example. That's one out of like 5 pages
Yes.
of policies. And do you have such a policy document that is used? And so again, our board members can assess the proposal and make a decision on how well this proposed budget. I think you hinted to some of those. You talked about this increase of 3.84 or 94, whatever, and normally it's been this other percent. But I think there was a suggestion of a policy in there, and I'm just wondering if those are written down.
The ILA speaks to it both in the appendix of how you calculate the budget. It's not just a, you know, how you're going to do the addition, but what's included, how it's done, the time limits, when that happens. And the ILA speaks to what's done with monies in a reserve and everything else. It's established that way through the ILA, and and that's the reason I sent it, because it's buried in there. It was put in there by the parties to the ILA, that's how they wanted their budgeting done, and that's simple. The other thing is the agenda bill that I forwarded to you, which, or at least fired it to the city clerk, which also talks about timelines, how it's accomplished, who sees it first, et cetera.
Okay, and so I know that your partners are a funding source. You talked about other revenues
Correct.
that have taken a hit,
Mhm.
like I'm not sure if the inspection fee or the permit fee or something like that. It's not something that's being passed through to them anymore. Are there, what other, is that it for revenue sources? Do you have other
We
funds?
have, King County EMS is roughly 1.2 million. I was going to say 1.3, so perfect. Funding source, which is part based on calls, it's part based on a population and how it does. We're, waiting to see what that number comes in. That's not going to come in until September, the end of September here. We also get, some of our partners get, which isn't to EFR directly, but the King County assessment, what that process is going to be. We're looking for those numbers. There are other we call it below the line, which Fire Districts 10 and 38 fund EFR separately for their volunteer stations that they have sleepers at. They pay for those costs, so the city of Issaquah, although it gets benefit from it, isn't paying the cost of the sleeper that stays there at night. What other? No, at Eastside, the headquarters staff, so they don't have a staff, so they pay to the equivalent of time that we do their work for them.
So will the board see, do you actually have a, a head count,
Yeah, thank you.
plan? I mean, total positions funded, and is there any, are you proposing, you talked earlier about not filling certain positions that were recently vacated. Is there a head count or total, any new positions being proposed in this budget? Wes is
No,
saying no, okay.
correct. There are no new positions. We've lost 3 out of it. The ongoing debate that we do work with the board on is what is the proper level of staffing? It's that question of, do you pay overtime or do you have overhead, i.e., bodies, and trying to find what that perfect level is, because we're moving into this stage, and we've done a couple presentations for the board now of roughly 1/3 of our employees are eligible to retire. A number of them have been postponed due to the economy, and so they put those dates off. And we're trying to do a steady release of people leaving the organization versus 1/3 of the organization leaving and taking all of that history and knowledge out, like every other government entity is dealing with right now. That's one of our biggest struggles, and trying to figure out what is right size for staffing that we can afford, yet because one of our big battles is right now is overtime. And this summer, we had 10 people out either on disability or FMLA for either self-injuries or family, birth of children and stuff. We lost 10 people, and that impacts staffing, and having to pay for that is a big struggle right now. So one of the other big the additional input for money, the revenue sources, is our fee for transport that we bill, and that so when we bill, we collect roughly 65% of what we bill. So that number is a really hard one to forecast, because our budget side is we're very conservative about what we're going to receive, and some months we're very high on collection. So there's this natural desire to go, okay, let's collect that, let's recognize it. And what we've seen is that our private ambulance is finally, after about 6 years, finally meeting their time limits, so we're not receiving penalties. They used to have to pay us if every time they didn't meet their response times, they didn't have a unit available. They're now meeting their requirements, which is good for our citizens because they get to a hospital in a timely fashion. We keep our units in service. The downside is we have less fees coming in, so we're having to balance that. The other that we have is AMR actually pays us to manage their contract. They service, American Medical Response is the private ambulance company that serves a majority of the Eastside Fire Departments. Eastside Fire and Rescue actually manages that contract. And so AMR pays us a fee to do that. And that funds the data analyst position that we have. So that's another source of revenue that we, larger source of revenue that we
Okay.
receive.
And so the board's going to see it first on October 9th, and,
Yes,
With the
they'll
board.
see it again September 11th because they're going to get a recommendation
Oh,
from the
the
Ops
11th.
Committee.
are you expecting action on October 9th?
It's quite possible. It depends, on the 16th is the Finance Committee, so depends on what they take from the Operations Committee. So it's quite possible that they'll take action. I imagine it's probably most likely the November meeting that, unless there's active discussion about what the budget should or shouldn't be.
Okay, I would just encourage you, if anything comes to light and there's an opportunity to bring it back in front of this council, please let us know.
Okay, and that-
All right, well, thank you, Greg.
and one last walk-on thing.
Okay. Wes Collins, welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be back. And I'll be really brief here. Just to give you the quick history, in 2013, you passed the amendment to the ILA for the NPO for a nonprofit organization. We also, at the same time, were doing the ILA. Once the ILA was done, an operations committee was created, and the first project they got was the MPO. So they took the MPO information, they took the amendment, they saw a couple of places where it was weak in their minds, so they strengthened it. And it basically, the things they changed were anytime there was any kind of gray area in the MPO documents, they just made sure that everything pointed back to the interlocal agreement. So the new amendment to the ILA is just stronger language saying, hey, if the interlocal agreement trumps. So that's the main thing. The main reason we're doing an MPO is to change the employer of record. Right now the employer is Fire District 10. They have a lot of power as the employer of record, and it makes more sense for the EFR board and Eastside Fire and Rescue to be the employer. And the only way we can be the employer without going to Regional Fire Authority or any of those things is to create the MPO. So the new amendment clarifies that. It'll be coming back before your council to be voted on. Once it's voted on, there's still a process that has to happen, and it will not become effective until the board directs staff to actually file the articles of incorporation with the state. And there's still a couple of hurdles we need to run through as staff before we're going to recommend that happening. So most likely, if everything works out well, 2016 would be the day, January 1st, 2016 would be the date that we would become a nonprofit organization. Before this, we were shooting for a January 1, 2015, but it's just apparent that we're not going to make that date, and we really need to do it on a January 1 so that all the bookkeeping changes, all the employment information changes on a January 1 date.
Okay. And earlier, I think only one of the partners, Sammamish, was the one that hadn't approved the same resolution that we had. And have their, have their questions or concerns, or if they've been able to give this the kind of attention? Do you see any other changes coming out of their further consideration of the nonprofit organization?
I don't see any other changes, but they are very reticent about acting on it until all of the questions have been answered. And the main question that's out there is a Department of Retirement Systems question. And basically what's going on is the IRS has changed some rules, and they've put out some draft rulemaking that says this is what a state organization that can be covered under a DRS type plan can be. And we qualify for all of those in the proposed rules. As a nonprofit, we would qualify. But DRS is saying, we're not willing to go down that road and say, yes, you do qualify, even though the Attorney General has said we do qualify. DRS won't say that until the final rule is made by the IRS. The IRS won't make the final rule till the end of this year or the first quarter of next year. And once that final rule's made, then DRS has to have their attorneys look at it. And it could be somewhere between the end of the first quarter of next year to mid-second quarter of next year before we get the final rule with all the attorneys signing off that says, yes, Eastside Fire and Rescue can qualify as an MPO and still stay under the retirement system. So again, long-winded version of it, but that's what we're waiting on. That's one of the things that's going to push us. And Sammamish has said that they're not going to act until they have that information. We're trying to encourage them to act. What we want is all the partners to act, because if you will approve the nonprofit, that gives staff the go-ahead to continue working this issue. What we don't want to do, it's going to take a lot of staff time to make an MPO happen, and it's going to actually take some cash. We're going to have to invest in some attorney opinions. We're going to have to invest in rewriting some, for example, our 457 plan document. And we don't want to do that if we have one partner who's saying, I'm not really that interested. So we want everybody to say, yes, we are interested. Yes, you have the go-ahead to do the MPO. We just also know that going into this, that it may not happen quickly, or it may not ever happen if we run into a roadblock that we haven't thought of. But we don't want to expend the dollars and the staff time if you, as the parties to the local agreement, don't want it to happen. So hopefully you guys will feel comfortable voting for it, and Sammamish will come along too. Right now, North Bend and District 10 have voted on the new amendment, and 38, it's on their schedule to do it. Sammamish had it on their schedule for September 2nd, but they postponed it.
When's it on our calendar?
As of right now, it's not. So that's why I wanted to make sure that we had the opportunity with representatives from Eastside Fire and Rescue here, so that we could begin to understand this and get it moving forward and create an agenda bill for it.
All right, okay, thank you. Any questions for Wes? Okay, thanks, Wes. Thanks, Greg. Oh, Greg's going to wrap up.
Yeah, I'm done. I'm just getting stuff out of here for any questions.
All right, well, thanks to both of you. I know the request to be here just came late last week, but I appreciate you walking through the traffic and getting here this evening and joining us. And
Again, thank you for the opportunity. Appreciate the time very much.
All right. Okay, so so that concludes our regular agenda for this evening, and we do have a planned executive session, but I think we're going to take a small break, and when the big hand on that clock is on the 10, we're going to start again. All right, thank you.
Oh, that's good. That's right. My brain is too fried to do that right now.
Yeah.